Good evening and welcome to our event this evening. My name is Peter Casarella. I'm the Executive Director of Fons Vitae, the Catholic Initiative at Duke University. And it's a great pleasure to see you here, to have you here, to be your host this evening. I myself am Professor of Theology at Duke Divinity, and Fons Vitae was founded in 2023 in the Divinity School, but for the whole university to deepen the Catholic tradition and debates and discussions about the Catholic tradition at Duke. We have more information in the back by the water cooler there if you want to know about other events we're doing this semester. I want to first thank some of the partners that made this possible. And before anything else, I have to thank the Fuqua Coach Case Center of Leadership and Ethics, represented here tonight by Teju, who's with us, but David Ridley from Fuqua helped make this possible. Sim Sitkin, the director of Cole, was essentially immediately embraced the opportunity to work with us, and then Sanyan Shang also, who helps Sim in that, also was stepped right up to the plate to work with us on this initiative. It was a beautiful collaboration. I also want to thank the Lumen Christi Institute at the University of Chicago. They're generously funding tonight's program with a grant provided by the John Templeton Foundation entitled In Lumine, Supporting the Catholic Intellectual Tradition on Campuses Nationwide. So we're very grateful to Lumen Christi and the Templeton Foundation, and especially to the people who are joining us online through that collaboration. Now to the main topic. Tonight's lecture is Professor Mary Hirschfeld. Mary Hirschfeld is the John T. Ryan Jr. Associate Professor of Theology and Business Ethics at Notre Dame. She is an economist with a PhD from Harvard University in economics from 1989. And she is a theologian with a PhD from the University of Notre Dame in 2013. Her works explore the boundaries between theology and economics. Her book, Aquinas and the Market Toward a More Humane Economy, published by Harvard University Press in 2018, deals with economic inequality, the technocratic paradigm, the financial crisis, and the common good. If there were a Heisman Award for looking at the intersection between business ethics and human flourishing, this would be at the top of my list, Aquinas and the Markets. And I have evidence for this, twofold. One, some of you may know I was myself at the University of Notre Dame between 2013 and 2020 and spoke at length about this book with another newly arrived professor, namely Martin Kramers. And we talked at great length about how we'd have to have a new program in the business school there that using this book as a point of departure. And now Martin Kramers is the dean of their business school, and Professor Hirschfeld is very active in the business ethics and society program. And the second evidence for my Heisman Award is that through a grant that Fons Vitae got recently from McDonald Agape Foundation, for which we're very grateful, we started a book club on Aquinas and the Markets that was run completely by the economists at Duke. And they had a vigorous discussion, debate, critique, discussion of this book, and they reported back that it was really a wonderful opportunity. So without further ado, our lecture tonight is Wealth is Good, but what kind of good is it? Please join me in welcoming Professor Mary Hirschfeld.
Okay, how's this working? All right. It is an incredible pleasure and honor to be here. Very often when I'm invited to give talks, I come into a room with about 10, 20 people. So this turnout is rather overwhelming. And the graciousness of Peter Casarella and everybody else involved has been really wonderful. So I'm very excited about it, but always nervous before talks. And I'm especially nervous because usually the 10 or 12 people are mostly random people off the street or maybe a stray student or so. So this is not quite the audience I was expecting, but I'm going to give the talk I prepared because what else can I do? Okay. I'm the weird person who started off life as an economist. God did this really weird conversion, and all of a sudden I was quitting my job and going to get a second PhD, which is extremely insane, in theology. So pretty much my whole career is defined around debates about whether markets and capitalism are good or are they bad. And everybody gets all polarized and excited about this question. Whenever someone asks me, is capitalism good or is it bad? I always say, yes. Yes, it's good. Yes, it's bad. And I think the reason why people are talking at cross purposes is they don't have a shared agreement about what kind of a good wealth is. And some might even, because they have a view of the kind of good that they think wealth is, they think wealth is bad. And others, because of the kind of view they have of wealth, they think that it's good. And so what I want to do today, and it's just going to be a very simple, using basic philosophical principles, roadmap of how should we think about the good of wealth, then focusing at the end on why people are so concerned about the way our economy is going. All right, I'm just going to dive in. So is wealth a good? The first thing we want to know is, what do we mean when we say wealth? What do we mean when we say wealth? And my good friend, Thomas Aquinas, he's my special buddy. He synthesizes all of ancient philosophy with the Christian tradition. And he says, this is not that hard. The first thing you need to start about when you think about wealth is there's two definitions. He always has two definitions. The first is you might be talking about natural wealth. Okay. So natural wealth is what an economist would call the real economy. Natural wealth is the actual goods and services that we humans use in order to achieve our various purposes. So food, that's part of natural wealth. My bottle of water, this is natural wealth. Okay. Okay. So the second way you might think about wealth is the money, the big pile of cash you have in the bank, the number of zeros in your account, your credit card and what it lets you do, all the way up to the big complicated financial instruments that the finance guys are cooking up and basically measure everything by money. Okay. Aquinas calls that artificial wealth. And artificial wealth is wealth, but it's artificial because it's made by humans. It's not actual goods that feed anybody anything. But they serve the purpose of facilitating transactions and exchanges and allowing us to coordinate our economic activity. So that's artificial wealth. Okay. Okay, ready for the big question. Is wealth a good? So we could take up the first definition. Is natural wealth a good? What do you guys think? So, sorry, but I'm aware that whenever I move my head, the volume is going up or down. Obviously, natural wealth is a good thing. If we had no natural wealth, we would be a complete non-starter. We would have starved to death a long time ago. And beyond the natural wealth we use in order to survive, there's a natural wealth that we use in order to live well, to do all kinds of interesting things, right? From basketball, which is very important, to coming to, listen to erudite talks about the nature of wealth. Like these are the kinds of goods that are served by natural wealth. Okay. The plane that I took to get here is a good thing, I hope. Okay. We can turn to the second question then. Okay, fine. The house, the food, the clothes, the bottles of water, all these things, that's really good. What about artificial wealth? Is not money the root of all evil? Somebody famous said that once, I think in the Bible somewhere. And my friend Aquinas, who's really smart, says, oh, of course it's good. Of course artificial wealth is good. It allows you to make these exchanges. If you imagine a world with no money, and some people like to imagine a world with no money, you would be imagining a world that's very, very poor in terms of natural wealth. And the reason for that is because I'm Catholic. God in his providence designed us to be social creatures. And one of the fundamental forms of our sociality is that we're economically interdependent. We produce much more by dividing labor and exchanging among ourselves than we could possibly do by trying to fend for ourselves. And if we had another hour, I would elaborate on that. For those of you who are not already sold on how great the division of labor is. But money helps grease those wheels. And it also allows us, the more elaborate financial instruments, allow us to do things like buy a house before we can actually afford it or save for our retirements. It allows a group of people who have a bit of savings to pool their resources to do big projects. Okay. So artificial wealth is clearly a good. Okay, I could stop my talk now. No. The real question is not whether it's good. Because in everything I said, people who have suspicions about wealth may have been making a lot of check marks, about objections they might want to make. What we need to ask is what kind of a good it is. Okay, so I'm going to turn, this time I'm going to go back to Aquinas' good friend Aristotle. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, chapter 1. This is just chapter 1, Aristotle. Says, look, if we're going to think about human action in the world, you have to notice that humans always act for a purpose. They have a reason for what they're doing. And whatever that reason is, they would call good. I have a good reason to do this. I'm pursuing some kind of a good through my action. Y'all good so far? Okay. But notice that there's many kinds of goods. And by this, I mean in a specific way. So I'm really glad I have a bottle of water here because I get dry mouth during a talk. Okay. Notice the water is good, but it's not like, wow, water. I want it because I want to give a good talk. Okay. Now, the next question you could ask, because you're a 2-year-old, is, well, why do you want to give a good talk? And I could supply many kinds of reasons. I could say, well, because you guys are paying me, and I would like to get a good reputation so other people will hire me to come and give good talks. And that would invite another question, which is, why do you want that? Or I could say, I like sharing my ideas with people, and it's great to do that, and I would like to do so clearly. So when I get to that reason, notice you don't need a second. You don't have to ask me, well, why do you want to share your ideas? You guys see that? So that's something that we call an intrinsic good. It's just good for its own sake. Whereas the bottle of water, lovely though it may be, is an instrumental good. Everybody? Lots of things are mixed. Like maybe that's not a bottle of water. Maybe it's something I unfortunately like better, like Dr. Pepper. I actually like Dr. Pepper. I just enjoy it. And it also would, clean my, so then it would be mixed. It would have an instrumental value. It would be keeping my mouth from being dry, and an intrinsic value, the pleasure I get from it. Is everybody? Wealth, according to this tradition and according to Aristotle, is maybe one of the few goods that we can easily categorize as either instrumental or intrinsic. Wealth in this idea is it's purely 100% nothing but instrumental. Okay. That's easy to see if you're talking about artificial wealth. What would it mean to treat your bank account as an intrinsic good? Like literally, the only reason you want that big bank account is because you want the big bank account. Okay. There was a scene in Breaking Bad once where the bad guy had amassed piles and piles of money, and a couple guys went into the room with the piles and piles of money, and they're like, wow, look at all this money. And then they dive into it and they flop around on it. And that's really exciting for exactly 5 seconds. Okay, that's what, okay. Nobody wants money for the sake of just the money. You want it for what you can buy it with, or whatever it does for you. What about natural wealth? Natural wealth is also, according to Aristotle and my buddy Aquinas, always going to be an instrumental good. Any object out there that I'm going to name as natural wealth, by definition, is valuable to me for something, right? So I want my nice, lovely house that I have in South Bend, and I want that because it's comfortable. It suits my lifestyle. It serves that purpose. Maybe you drive a nice car, and I ask you, well, what is that for? You say, well, reliable transportation, and I kind of like the status that goes with it. You could name what good that you got out of it. Okay. And again, if I put an object there and you couldn't say why it was a good thing, it wouldn't be wealth. Okay. So both artificial wealth and natural wealth are purely instrumental. And I also want to point out, the artificial wealth is even more instrumental because artificial wealth is instrumental to natural wealth, which is instrumental to whatever are these list of goods that we want out of it. Okay. Y'all good? Okay, let me see where I'm supposed to be now. Okay. So if all this wealth is an instrumental good, the next big question is, what is it good for? What good do you intend out of this wealth? Okay. And the answer is the desire for, people desire wealth for many, many, many different reasons. Okay. If we're thinking about natural wealth, some wealth is necessary for survival. More wealth is necessary if you want to live comfortably. You might want even more wealth to pursue various projects or to make possible certain kinds of experiences. Okay. But there are other reasons to want to be wealthy. In our society, being wealthy, in both senses of the term, is definitely a path to enjoying status. And we like status. Or for many people, having a lot of wealth, considering themselves wealthy or rich, is a way of feeling safe. They're now in a position to weather the rainiest of rainiest days that comes along. And that's a good thing. And I could go on, and I will go on later on down my list. Okay. There's many different reasons why people want to be rich, but their idea about what it would mean to be rich and the reasons for desiring it vary quite a bit. Okay. So now I've got all these different reasons why you might want to have wealth. And I want to do another one of my distinctions following my friend Thomas Aquinas. Okay. One quick pass test about whether you have a good reason for wanting to have wealth versus a bad reason is to ask whether your desire for wealth is satiable. Is that word? I can be satisfied with what I have. Or is it insatiable? Do I think of wealth as being rich as, do I have enough? That would be a satiable desire for wealth. Or rich means having as much as I can get. And that would be an insatiable desire for wealth. Okay. It's going to turn out that there's a lot at stake with that question. And just to take you right into the thicket, why this is so perplexing. Aristotle famously gives an example which Aquinas dutifully repeats, which is, now there's another kind of thing that's out there that's indisputably instrumental, and that's medicine. Nobody takes medicine because woohoo, more medicine. Okay. And if I ask you to think about your desire for medicine, so say you have a headache, the good that you seek with the medicine is to get rid of the headache. So how many aspirins do you need in order to get rid of the headache? The bottle tells me 2. Okay. How many aspirins do you want? 2. Would it make any sense whatsoever to say, well, aspirin is the kind of thing that I want to get as much aspirin as I can. I've got a headache. It says 2, maybe 10 would be better. Maybe 100 would be better. Nobody thinks that, right? It's quite clear that you only want as much and no more of the medicine than the doctor says you need to achieve the end that you want to achieve. And then Aristotle and Aquinas both look at you and say, that's exactly how you should think about money. How much money do you want in your life? You should think about it like 2 aspirin rather than trying to get as much as you can. Did you notice it got a lot trickier? Okay, so what we want to figure out in the remaining half of this talk is, why is it getting trickier? So I have developed a parable. This is not out of the Bible. This is a Mary parable. Once upon a time, there was a family. The family are called the aardvarks. Okay, and the aardvarks have a real passion for music. So that's a real good that they want for its own sake. They want music. And they happen to make a living by being potters. They spin pots and sell them to their neighbors. And they're sitting around going, how can we pursue our goal of music? We want to bring music into our life. And they think about it, and they're like, we would really like to get a piano. And not just any piano. We want to get a really nice piano that will fit our space and just give us exquisite sounds when we play it. So part of the point of making it a nice piano is to say, having the right relationship with wealth does not involve minimizing what you want, right? If the really nice piano fits your life, then you should go get that really nice piano. So my aardvark family, they go off and they work really hard at their pottery because they got to get the money they need to buy the piano. Day in, day out, they work hard. They put the money in a jar. One day, glorious day, they come home. The last pennies go in. They've got enough. They buy their piano. So what do? They buy their piano. Kids start taking lessons. They all learn how to play the piano. They start inviting their neighbors over to enjoy these musical soirees. And they live happily ever after. Now, they still have to make a few pots because they still got to make a living and eat and stuff. But they dial back their work effort. Their life is about making music. Isn't that nice? You should hear birds chirping when I'm talking about the aardvarks. Okay. But because it's a parable, you can imagine they have cousins, because everybody's got cousins. Their cousins live 3 villages down, and their cousins are called the warthogs. You already know what kind of people they are. And the warthogs, because they are family, they also, they're like music. Let's make music in our lives. Music would be lovely. And they're also potters. So let's make a lot of pots, sell a lot of pots, make a lot of money, we'll buy a piano. It's the same story. They work really hard, jar fills up, get the piano. Yay. They're really happy. They play the piano a little bit. But then Johnny, it's always Johnny says, hey, Ma, you know, Schubert has these incredible trios. If you need a violin and a cello, and if we had a violin and a cello to go with our piano, we could play those. Okay, so now what do they got to do? They got to buy a violin and a cello. So they have to go back and make more pots. They make their pots, they work really hard. Notice they're not spending a lot of time on their piano. They get their cello and their violin. Now they're ready for their trio. This time we'll make it Susie. And then Susie says, but did you hear that jazz music? Jazz is so cool. Let's do some jazz. Throw that into the mix. So now they need a saxophone, a bass, whatever jazz musicians need. So they got to go back and make more pots. They finally get their jazz band ensemble together. But now their house is filled to overflowing with instruments. They can hardly sit down. So now what do they need? A bigger house. And to get the bigger house, back to the pottery shed. And now we're decades down the project. Kids have moved away. Mom and dad are really old. Now they die. And their life has never been about music, not for a second. It's been about making pots. Okay. That's an insatiable desire versus an insatiable desire. Okay. You all good so far? Okay. So we're going to pause for a brief history. The last talk I gave before the pandemic was a history of happiness. This is a really brief history of happiness, just to get to the essential point. Up until sometime in the early modern period, everyone thought it was obvious, dead obvious, that desiring money for its own sake or in an open-ended, unbounded way, which you could call greed, which I will use because it's a shorter word, or pleonexia, open-ended desire for more. They all agreed it was a vice. They certainly saw that plenty of people had the vice, but they knew it was a vice. And not just a vice, it was just stupid. Because what they would say is, look, define for me what is a rich man. And they would say, it's obvious. The rich man is the man who has enough. He has what he needs. And having enough, he can go about and do the good things like playing pianos that he wants to do. The poor man is the one who does not have enough. Okay. Now, that could be somebody who's really in poverty. A poor person in poverty has to devote their whole lives to working hard just to make a living. But it's also, my friends, the warthogs. They never thought they had enough. Okay. And that person is actually a poor person. Okay. Okay, so somewhere between then, the ancient wisdom, and now, there emerged the idea that the purpose of economic activity was not to secure enough wealth in order to do the things we wanted to do. Rather, it came to be thought that the idea was to get as much money as you could, full stop. And in particular, businesses should be oriented towards maximizing their profits in their activities. Okay. Now, this was not necessarily, morally speaking, pretty bad move. But it did have good outcome. It turns out if people on average are scrambling around trying to get as rich as possible because they've thrown off any idea that greed is a vice, or at least minimized it, that generates some social goods. Greedy businessmen may be greedy, but they also tend to be peaceful. So that was the argument Albert O. Hirschfeld makes about how one of the arguments for capitalism was coming in. We could get people to stop having duels to the death for their honor and instead have them just try to trade with each other to get rich. They at least are not fighting each other. A deeper reason, though, comes up through the economists, specifically Adam Smith, and that is greedy people who are pursuing their greed through business almost necessarily, not maybe necessarily, have to be generating unintended good consequences for other people. If I go into business with the object of making as much money as I can, it's probably true that I should deliver some pretty good goods and services to my neighbors to get them to buy it so I can get rich. Okay. And it seems to be the case, and I do take it to be the case, that once this idea was unleashed, you had a lot of people out there trying to make a lot of money. They created a lot of businesses and a lot of goods and services that their neighbors did in fact benefit from and like. And you get this massive lift out of poverty, just by historical standards, completely unprecedented. So whenever I'm talking to my liberal friends who are very worried about the bad effects that I'm going to talk about right away, I want to remind them that we now expect to live to be at least 80, late 70s or whatever, 40, up until like 100 years ago would have been the expected life expectancy. Literacy rates have gone way up. The fact that we're even here is only possible because we're not busy sweating with the plow back home trying to get the harvest out. Okay. And that may well be driven by this idea that getting rich is important. Okay. I'm not sure, much of me would like to go back to the Middle Ages, but I don't think I pushed that button. I really don't. Okay. So it seems like it might be good. Problem is, as we transitioned into the full embrace of the idea that maximizing wealth, and that it's a reasonable project, there were plenty of voices at the time saying, that's crazy. Why would you spend your whole time trying to maximize wealth and never get around to playing the piano? That's just nuts. If you spend your lives trying to maximize wealth, you're going to end up being one of those idiots like the warthogs who end up working hard and completely missing the boat. That's me paraphrasing Max Weber, who said, this is so peculiar, we need to figure out why they would do it. And he invents the Protestant work ethic to explain this mass craziness. He's not alone. For people living through this transition, there were many, many voices to say, this is completely crazy. I can give you an actual quote by John Maynard Keynes in the same vein. Now, Keynes, because he's an economist, recognizes the Adam Smith story. He realizes that we have had to live a mass insanity for several centuries because it had the benefit of lifting lots and lots of people out of dire poverty. But he also dreamt of the day when we could leave it all behind. In his essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, Keynes notes that the steady economic growth of the last few centuries has put us in sight in 1929, and he saw the Great Depression coming, but he thought, we'll get past that. In 1929, he says, 100 years from now, the economic problem will almost certainly be solved. We will finally have arrived at a world where everybody will have enough. Okay. And then he muses about what will happen when we have finally arrived. This is the quote. We could return to some of the most sure and certain principles of religion and traditional virtue, that avarice is a vice, that the exaction of usury is a misdemeanor, and the love of money is detestable, that those who walk most truly in the path of virtue and sane wisdom are those who take least thought for the morrow. Key line, we shall once more value ends above means and prefer the good to the useful. We shall honor those who can teach us how to pluck the hour and the day virtuously and well. We will honor the delightful people who are capable of taking direct enjoyment in things, the lilies of the field who toil not, neither do they spin. You need a more immediate example of what he's talking about. I don't know how many of you guys watched the Star Trek series. Star Trek is that utopia. Everything is available, everything you need is available at the push of a button. Nobody has to worry about making money or sweating it out or whatever, and they're free to go and explore the galaxies and have all these adventures. Okay. Of course, this is not exactly what happened. Keynes thought we'd be done with a world centered on expanding wealth within a century. That is, he thought we would have arrived right now. And instead, we have not only kept working, we're possibly working harder. Our standard of living is vastly higher than it was in his day and even surpassing what he imagined it would be. And yet we all still think we're economically strapped. Okay. So this is the urgency to the final question I want to ask. What sort of desires lie behind the fact that our desire for wealth seems to be insatiable? What sorts of goods are we seeking when we, who by any conceivable standard are quite affluent, still think we need more wealth? Okay. All right. So what lies behind the insatiable desires for wealth? There's multiple ways that this can happen. And just to check in, I don't know how many of you guys are exempting yourselves from this problem. I'm fairly confident that I've asked how many of you desire to be a billionaire. that it would in fact empirically be the case that many of you would not. Some people can nod, no desire to be a millionaire. I'm not this guy. Okay. Should I ask you to raise your hands or not? I don't know. How many of you guys would like a 10% raise? Okay. Almost everybody wants a 10% raise. Even my Marxist colleague back at Villanova, who was against capitalism, wanted a 10% raise. Okay. By the way, after years and years of working on this, I have to say, I do not want a 10% raise. I have enough. I'm very wealthy by what I need. Okay. So something is in the waters that's making us all do this way. So what are the many reasons that, and then I ask my students, why do you want all this money? Why do you want that 10% raise? So the list, and I could go on, but we'll start with luxury. It's nice to have a nice house. It's nice to have a nice car. It's nice to have nice clothes. I'm a very comfort-driven person. It's nice to have those high-count sheets in your bed. Okay. But the psychologists, the behavioral psychologists will tell you there's a trap in this. It's a hedonistic trap. We always adjust like a thermostat to whatever is our current standard of living. And then from that perspective, it seems like just a little bit more in that direction would be better. So back in the 1950s, families were raising their whole family in houses that had a square footage of 1,000. And then the rich family had 2,000 square feet. And they thought they were rich. Okay, we've just moved this on, right? The 2,000 square feet people started thinking, it's a little bit, we could use an extra room. 3,000 square, everybody keeps moving up and it never stops. Okay. And the minute it stops not stopping, you're in the insatiable wealth category. That's why you always feel poor. Okay, now maybe you are not so comfort, pleasure driven as these luxury minded people. Probably a lot of you are not. You can tell I kind of suffer from this. It's not going to let you off the hook because another component of being human is that what we think of as a decent standard of living has a strong social component. You need to interact with other people on a level playing field. So if you're back in the 1950s and all your neighbors are working really hard to get from the 1,000 square foot house to the 2,000 square foot house, if you get left behind, you're now in a bad neighborhood. You're going to have pressure to move up with them. And as long as you've got the luxury people leading the parade, the rest of us are dragged along with us, which I think is a rough and ready explanation for why it is that we are richer than anybody's ever been in the history of the world. And we all want that 10% raise because you actually feel poor relative to the standard of living you're trying to get up to. Okay. And I just want to point out, note the unfreedom that goes with that. If I think my desirable standard of living is just out of reach, and you offer me a higher paying job that I don't want to take, I have to seriously think about taking it anyway, right? Because I need the money. If I have to think about working a little bit extra overtime and leave my family behind, I'm going to have to do that. It's going to push us out all the way. Speaking as somebody who does not want a 10% raise, there's a lovely freedom about deciding whether I want to do this talk because I want to share my ideas with you, not for some other reason. Okay, a few other pernicious temptations that are out there in the mix. Status. I have a whole page on status and I have 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to give you 3 minutes on status. We could say that to the extent that a desire for the lifestyle of the rich and famous is not really about the lifestyles themselves. It's not about the private jets. It's really about the status that goes with it. Okay. The idea that consumerism is driven by the desire for status was made famous by Thorstein Veblen with his idea of conspicuous consumption. But it has an even older pedigree. It turns out human nature has been more or less the same since like forever. So Christian saints like Catherine of Siena is trying to write a manual. And she says, greed is a real problem. There's people out there who are greedy. The reason they're greedy is because of their vanity. They want to get the nicer cloak so their neighbors will, just stare at them with envy. Bernard Mandeville in his Fable of the Bees, talking about all the vices people are pursuing and how that generates good outcomes like wealth. When talking about the desire for more money, he primarily talks about it in terms of pride and vanity. Adam Smith, in his Theory of Moral Sentiments, sadly neglected work, although more people are reading it now. You think he's all about making the money. He's the father of economics. He's got a famous passage in there. He's like, What is all this toil and bustle for? Why are people running around? You know, when it comes down to the actual things, the king does not really live that much better than the pauper. They both have full stomachs. They both have a roof over their head. Like, really, what's it about? He says what it's really about is status. The person with status is somebody that everybody looks up to. And he says it would be better. Humans are actually wired to want other people to admire us. And he doesn't think that's a bad thing. But he says it's very few people who will be admired for doing good things, for being honorable, for being noble in some way. The vast majority of people are going to admire the glamour and the glitz of the wealth. Therefore, if you want to get that status, you're going to go down the path of pursuing the glamour, the glitz, and the wealth. Okay. Now, I want you to notice from a social point of view, this is the main reason we're seeking wealth. We no longer get quite that nice story about all these greedy people producing all these mousetraps. And we are still getting mousetraps. But now we have a zero-sum game. Now we have a zero-sum game, and it is not the case that you're going to make everybody better off by raising the general GDP. Okay, even if you don't widen the inequality, the people at the bottom will still be suffering relative to people at the top because of the status game, and that will never go away. And we'll be talking about this in the class we're doing tomorrow. I think it's really relevant to our current situation right now. Okay. All right, moving on. The desire for luxury and or status has an allied good right there with it, and that's security. We already talked about wanting to be able to weather all the bad turns. One of my favorite stories from life is this. When I was at Occidental College, the chair of my department's wife was a very successful banker. Nice lady. And she had managed, this was the time of the golden parachute. She'd gotten herself golden parachuted out of like 3 or 4 successive vice presidencies of banks. They were very rich. They had this monstrously huge house, 6,000 square feet. Like the kids needed walkie-talkies to like in touch with their parents. And at one point, my chair confided to me. He says, you know, she lies awake tossing and turning every single night. Every single night, she's worried about what happens if the next downsizing makes it the case that we can no longer afford our beach house. She's sweating it out and super anxious. Okay. The desire for security turns out to be one of those insatiable things. It's reasonable to want to have saved for the rainy day. That's good prudence. But if you want perfect security, there's no limit to how much you need in order to feel safe. My cousin, trying to figure out when she's going to retire, says, well, I can't retire this year. I'm like, why? You've got a nice nest egg. Well, but what if Michael and me, what if we end up in, with Alzheimer's and we need 30 years of that kind of care? We don't have a big enough thing. So that means she's going to keep working. Okay, so there's just an inability to balance this out. So it's insatiable. Okay, down to 5 minutes. I'm going to just name and move past the other two. I teach in the business school. I'm always trying to get my students to rethink what goods they really want out of wealth. Can they name the good of music like the aardvarks? Can they name what they're really after? Or is it this insatiable thing? And you can see that they see my point. And they see that they need a good answer because they still want to be investment bankers. And not for the intrinsic goodness of investment banking. And then what they come up with, I hear this all the time, is like, well, I'm going to make a lot of money. Because then when I make a lot of money, billions, then I'll be able to do all these great things. I'll be this great benefactor. I'll be like Bill Gates. I'll outdo Bill Gates. Okay. I don't have time to go into it. I think it's self-deluded. I don't think they're, okay. I don't think it's rational to say I'm going to work really hard, 120-hour work weeks for the rest of my life so that I can save the planet by giving them lots of money. I mean, a few saints might do that, but not all of my students are saints. And I also want to kick up Sam Bankman-Fried as an example, which is the minute I think my goal is maximizing money as much as I can. How many corners am I cutting to get there? How much harm am I doing along the way? I'm not actually serious about doing good in the world. Okay. The other one that I think is fairly pernicious and maybe captures all of this, down to 5 minutes, so gesture at it. This is a little bit more theological. Money mimics God. We are actually built to desire the infinite. As a Christian, I think that. And the infinite we desire is knowing and loving God as God knows and loves himself. Okay. Money has the quality of seeming infinite because I can always get more. a billion now, a trillion later, right? I can keep ratcheting it up. It never stops. And the other quality it has is because you're hungry, you have an insatiable desire for this perfect, infinite good. You always imagine that it's the next step, the next rank up of the economic ladder. That's the one that will land you in the paradise that you're hungry for. There's this vagueness. So I'll often ask my students, why do you want the investment banking thing? Some people have good reasons. I want to pay off my debt. But some of them are like, well, it will just open up the door to more possibilities. Who knows? Like, it's a resource. It could cash out into anything. That cash out into anything allows us to pick up that desire for the infinite good. But I want you to notice that maybe this example does not resonate with you. The idea of the possible good that you haven't named yet is so seductive, but the reality is always disappointing. Have you experienced this? When I was a kid, the high holy day of the year was Christmas morning, because you go out and there's just these packages, and those packages could be anything. And you open up those packages and they're good stuff. Got an easy bake oven. I got a bicycle. I got all this stuff. Am I the only person who by mid-afternoon on Christmas morning was going, Mom, when is Christmas coming again? Do you know that? There's that letdown. And the reason there's a letdown is however great that bicycle is, and bicycle is great, it's a finite good. And what my heart is longing for with the unopened package, which I want to say is that big bank account. The unopened bank account could be anything. All right. So we live in a world, I think, where we are dominated by ideas of wealth, where our ideas, sorry, I'm having coughing problems, that are really this insatiable desire for wealth. And many of the conversations I had before this talk says you're all aware of the many, many ways it's distorting our world. This insatiable desire for money causes firms to focus on maximizing short-term profits right now for shareholders at the expense of all these sorts of other goods. It's causing our students to just work so hard to get that good job and forget about learning and growing and spending time with their families. There's kind of a tragedy afoot. Okay. So just to repeat, I want to make it clear. There's a very strong case about the goodness of wealth. Again, even though I romantically sometimes want to go back and be a medieval peasant, closer to the ground, not everybody leaves home. You just do. It's hard work. It absorbs you. Keynes was very good on this. Grinding poverty has been a blight on humankind for a long, long time. It cannot be bad that we're out of it. The Catholic Church affirms that progress is good. This wealth is good. But the real ideal of all this wealth is the one that Keynes named. If we arrive at wealth, it's a chance to turn from the plow and turn towards the higher goods of pursuing truth, goodness, beauty, cultivating our communities, cultivating our families, spending time with each other in communion, going out on walks and appreciating nature, and maybe drawing closer to God. Okay. So this is all diagnosis. That's got to be a big disappointment, because I had the answers, but I ran out of time. Actually, I didn't. I have a lonely little paragraph for you. I think it helps to name it. I do think it helps to be able to see what it actually is. And I want you to notice that the question that you should always be invited to ask when you say, no, I really just need a little bit more money, is to name the good, name it. Name the good that you want to get out of it. And hold that up in the light and see if it's a really good reason. This would also extend to public policy and these sorts of things. We want to measure everything in terms of numbers and metrics, and get more of them is always better. I always want to say, do the imagination. What are the concrete goods that you could point out that you want to achieve by getting all these instrumental things right? It's a small thing, and it takes the practice, because everybody just jumps to let's get more of the instrumental goods and let the ends take care of themselves. Okay, that's my non-theological response, an answer that's available to everybody. Thank you for your time. I do, yeah.
That was brilliant. provocative, engaging, very multifaceted. Thank you so much, Dr. Hirschfeld. We have plenty of time for questions. We have a few online questions, but let's start with the here. Who would like to get us going? Let's start over here in the corner. Troy will come around with the microphone.
Thank you for being here, Professor Rohit Fonseca. I was 2018 Notre Dame undergrad, now here at the business school. So go Irish. Question is for people, I mean, here in this room in a business school setting, you have a lot of young people with a Catholic or Christian background who are really interested in kind of living this life of virtue, but also perhaps pursuing, these positions of power, these positions in corporate America. What's your advice to us if we don't play, it's game theory to an extent. If we don't play the game, if we don't try and, take those leadership roles, that we surrender those to the secular world, and then we lose our institutions and they become tools of a more nefarious or at best secular way of life?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's the hardest question my students ask me. And again, I don't have the magic bullet. What I want to, a big part of our curriculum is saying, okay, if the good of the firm is not to maximize the short-term profits, what is the good that you're seeking as a business person? So it's that exercise of naming them. And the Catholic Church conveniently helps us out. It says, the number one purpose of the business is to provide good goods and good services to the community. Okay, so build a better mousetrap, and you'll make people better off. Okay. Number two is because work is important to human flourishing. So to provide an environment of good work for your workers, that would be a number two. You want to make sure that they have agency, are a part of the enterprise. So it's a clear vision, I think, of what a good firm is up to. Now, firms also have to make a living. They got to pay everybody. They need to, if they want to grow, they need maybe some profits. But the idea is profits are instrumental. They should be in service of these higher goods. Okay. So I've named what the vision looks like from this perspective. Now the real challenge is, but I'm going to go into a firm that's going to put a lot of pressure on me to maximize my profits. And there, the answer raises. One is, do you have the opportunity to go out and start your own firm? That would be, it's not going to have the same payoff probably, but you're in control of your own thing. But maybe your best path really is to get into corporate America. You can have the ambition, and I want you to have the ambition of, while I'm there, I know I can't change the whole system, but whenever I have a chance to go for the good goods over the maximizing profits, I want to steer my ship in that direction. When I ever have a chance to treat my employees with dignity and respect and think of them, I want to steer in that. So I can want to do the little good. Like, we all live in a fallen world. You can't save everything, but if I can plant some goodness, that's a good thing. The danger is, because we're social, if you're in that environment, it's hard not to get reabsorbed by their values. It's really hard. So in order to resist that, you've got to cultivate your faith life. You need to build up a community of like-minded people who will support you and keep you on track. And that's the best answer I can give.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hirschfeld, for your talk. I'm not a business student or anything, so I've not studied economics, so I apologize if I'm not expressing myself well in my question. But I was curious about what you had to say about the Keynesian view that eventually we'll reach a level where everyone kind of has some level of enough, at which point we can sort of pause this delusion that greed isn't actually vicious or something like that, and then go from there. I can't really imagine how that would work, though. It would seem to me that if,
Well, it didn't.
right, but I mean, it seems to me that, I mean, you started to outline this in terms of outline how this would work for companies or for perhaps policy decisions, but it seems to me that as consumers, if everyone just sort of decides to I guess live in the way that you're describing and sort of act virtuously, it seems that the whole system will come falling down, right? Like, it doesn't seem that actually this is a system that could sort of sustain itself in a virtuous way, right? If everyone takes seriously the fact that usury is actually morally reprehensible, then the whole banking institution comes down, and then with it everything else, right? So I can't imagine this sort of thing functioning if everyone acts virtuously. And so I'm just wondering what I mean, I also haven't studied these things, so perhaps.
No, you're
this is
saying it
something,
perfectly.
but
I mean, it's almost as though I'd paid you and planted that question. Because that's the question that needs to be asked. Suppose you guys all got religion from me in 20 minutes and have gone back and said, I'm going to be happy with what I have. I'm going to stop killing myself to make more. And we cut back on our crazy consumption patterns. Would that not just destroy the economy? Wouldn't it put a lot of people out of work? Wouldn't all these bad things follow? That's part of the question. So I have a two-pronged answer. The one I used to lean on is the birds chirping answer, which is A, not that many people are going to do it. So you can start making that move and gradually shift the culture in that direction. And as you gradually shift the culture, the economy can do its magic of reallocating resources to configure to the new patterns. So maybe you don't need to worry about it that much. That does not entirely let me off the hook. The increasing political instability around the world is closely tied to the rising inequality, and especially the perception that middle class and lower middle class people have stagnated for decades and are falling behind. And I'm not a political scientist, but I have to respect them enough to know that there might be a good to a growing economy, which means we still have to want profit maximizers because of the political fallout of having to do this other social work. So I do not know the answer to that question. And then my get out of jail free cards that you may or may not accept is, it's not my job to figure out what's the globally right thing to do. I can tell you what the principles are and what our lives, because we're talking about consequences, unintended consequences, and then deal with the consequences as they come up as best we can. But that's the live issue.
Question from online.
Yeah, this question is from the live stream here. This individual wants to know whether it's possible to pursue wealth for reasons other than luxury, status, security, or an insatiable desire for the infinite.
It's always good to have concrete candidates to respond well. I can imagine very benign reasons to want to get a certain amount of wealth. Imagine that you're a person who actually has refined tastes about art. You really see the beauty and goodness of art. And you recognize that it would be good to have a hand in having beautiful art in your home that you would actually really love, not just because your neighbors would be impressed, but because you love it. And maybe because then you could have, you could share that art with your friends or family, or maybe you could make, whatever display room you had open to the public and share that art with people. And if I had an ambition like that, it's still definable. Like I would want to define, okay, how much do I think would allow me to achieve this general purpose? And it might make sense to pursue it in that way. People can have callings in life that have higher or lower standards of living that go with it, higher or lower wealth demands that go with it. But I would always ask you to check it out and make sure you can name what the stopping point would be. And if you can't name the stopping point, however good the reason sounds, the absence of the stopping point puts you on the path towards treating wealth as an end and not as a means.
Dr. Nekaba.
So you mentioned Keynes's 1930 essay, and part of what he, I believe, says in there is he imagines a world today where, people were going to work 10 to 15 hours a week. And what I wonder is how that kind of vision, how you think about that in conjunction with the Catholic teachings about the dignity of work and the dignity of work and the importance of work to the human condition.
That's why I think it's important that if we go down that vision, the good of it is that we would still work. We would just dial back the amount of space in our lives devoted to work. Because Catholic Church is very strong on the idea that work is part of our fulfillment as human nature, and we can name many, many of the goods of work. It's very bad for people to be unemployed, not just because of the lack of income, but because of the inability to exercise their agency in the world, to do good for other people, all the other things that come along with good work. So I don't think it's meant to zero out work for everybody all the time. I will say, with the rise of all the automation and technology, we have to start seriously engaging the question of what we're going to do in a world where there's not enough work for people. Because while some of us, maybe not me, could use that freedom to pursue higher goods and do good things, there's a creeping problem of affluence. I don't know if you guys notice this. So I always use my stock examples. One of my family members has a son who is now 35, God help him. I love that kid. He's never been out of his basement. He runs Twitch. I don't know if any of you guys, he runs streams for gamers. He has like 3 people. Like, he's not making any money. The reason why he's putting body and soul together is I guess he's a charming dude. Girls are always willing to support him in the manner to which he is accustomed. And it's not at all rare to run into these fail sons, these people who are opting out because they don't see the purpose and point of working. And that's a real, and that dilemma is going to expand. The more wealth spreads around. We can do UBI, which is a good way to finesse a lot of problems coming with, the way the economy is evolving. But it risks having a whole population that does not really know what to do, and the results are not salutary. And so maybe, and this could be your argument, we need to keep up this fake idea that we want more in order to avoid the perils of not working at all. Okay. And that might be right. I will say, my sense is Keynes was worried about that. We need to start preparing now for a future in which work will not be, strictly speaking, necessary in order to survive. And I would say we need to prepare for that because with AI and all these other things, economists have always thought that when technology displaces work in one place, work crops up in some other place. I'm not 100% sure that that keeps going on forever. So part of it is you guys should all take liberal arts courses and learn how to pursue the true, the good, and the beautiful. But you're naming, you guys are all doing a great job of naming the critical questions.
Maxine's been working hard. He has a question from the online group.
Yeah, another person from the live stream asks, what is your response to trying to make more money to keep oneself safe in case of emergency or a health crisis? Is this an instance of greed if one is only padding their savings and not increasing their lifestyle?
So I think there's a real trap in our society. And now I am going to have to be theological, just straight out theological. As human beings, we have some agency in our lives, but we do not have perfect agency over our lives. Among other things, you can save all the money that you want. You're still going to die, 100% guaranteed, 100%. And if you're going to 100% guaranteed die, that means you're going to 100% guaranteed suffer. And money is not going to buy your way out of it. I hate to break it to you. So how do I balance the prudent desire to want to have enough money to weather the ordinary swings, ebbs, and flows of life? Like, it's good to have money saved up for when the tree in the back of my yard hits, and it inevitably will, smash my roof. Okay, it's not bad to have money piled up against that contingency. You need to think about reasonable contingencies and realize that part of life is sometimes something hits you out of the blue. I hate to just do tragedies. You're on a plane and all of a sudden you're in the Potomac. Right? Just stuff happens and we don't have full control. That means you also need to be cultivating a sense that wealth is a gift. It helps me some, but it's not a savior. It's not a God. You need to deal with human vulnerability in a way that's more in your own soul. How am I going to deal with the fact that sometimes terrible things are going to happen and I can't do it?
Carrie?
Thank you for that talk. I felt this was all very micro. This was all very much what your decision should be, what your goal should be. But the reality is, in the economy, as human beings, we live in a society. There's always economic interaction. So to pick up on the example of that pottery family, maybe that one pottery family did the right thing. They worked hard for a while, they got their piano, and then they happily lived ever after. But they made, in order to afford that piano, they made nicer pots. They put another firm out of business. Now, the real rubber that hits the road when we have interactions, consider, what does my action mean for somebody else? What does it mean? All of human history is change, there's creation, there's progress, but there's always destruction. And there can be even some beneficial if you put somebody out of business, maybe they have to sit down, scratch their head and figure out what else to do. And that can be beneficial, or it can be not beneficial if they're just left behind and there's nothing for them to do. And there are lots of parts in this country where you see that. You just go to Detroit and you see what happens when people are quote unquote left behind. Wealth can be good in the sense that you satisfy that one desire, and then that's it. But you can achieve that one way, or that can happen that one way where you genuinely create something new, or when there's some externality in the economics lingo on somebody else. Where do we draw the line? Because if you think that to the end, you can select any action you take, any saving you put in some mutual fund will find its way into some dirty business, which is maybe immoral, which pursues wealth the wrong way or for the wrong end. Now, am I complicit in that? Do I have some responsibility for that? What do you make of that, like more interactive macro view of economic behavior?
Yet another question that's exactly on point. This one is a hard one, partly because I think we have this modern habit of thought that I think is sneakily infected by the idea that we're God and we are in charge of all of the possible outcomes. So the question is, we live in a complex economy, and my actions as a consumer, however virtuously or not I'm doing them, have impacts, spillover effects on other people. And arguably, economists have a well-defined study about obvious externalities like smokestacks blowing smoke into the sky. And some of those externalities are so direct and obvious, it's perfectly reasonable to take them into account in your actions. Then there's just an enormous, I mean, all of our little transactions probably have downstream effects. Like I buy a rug. Do I know that was not made with horribly, exploited child labor? I do not. That kind of thing. The idea is to recognize that the scope of our agency is limited. You want to act justly in your transactions. You want to act justly in you want to have a good relationship with wealth. You want to act justly with other people. It just seems to me like that's intrinsically good. I'm getting this from John Ruskin, but I think he was right. The rest is outside your control. It's hard to know where to draw the line. Some of those externalities I can see are in my control, and some are further downstream. I have argued in a paper that's sadly not read as much as it should be, saying we should take some of those larger concerns into the public square and say, I can see that there's all these externalities of all the things I'm doing, and it causes, say, a lot of child labor factories in India, or maybe I can see that it's causing environmental degradation. And maybe I want the government to start thinking about ways so that we can collectively respond to these things. And the idea is we're all collectively benefiting from the economy. We should collectively bear responsibility for the harms that come down, but it would be at a different level. So that's kind of how I would want to think about it. But I will say, I can't help but saying this. I think the whole modern project of pursuing progress through science and technology and what the social sciences do and all the rest has a little bit of hubristic ambition of thinking we can design good outcomes for all people all the time if we just get the math right, if we can just figure it out, we'll get the right policies set up, and then all shall be well. And if you just read history, it is littered with policies that were well-intentioned that had unintended consequences that weren't always good because you cannot anticipate what's not already in your mathematical equation. So it would be to add, and I've got my friend, the public policy guy back there, to use your tools but recognize their limits. They can give you an idea of what the effects are, and they can give you an idea about what some solutions are. But realize those systems are mathematical systems. They're kind of like AI. They already incorporate what you already know, and they do not incorporate the mass complexity of the world as it is. So you want to tread lightly, be willing to back off things that seem like a bad direction, steer the ship. So that's my soapbox speech for today.
No more pressing questions. Let me just say it's been a great pleasure. I want to thank all of you, both the online community and those who joined us here. I want to thank the Cole Leadership Institute for their hospitality, for inviting us here tonight. It was a very gracious act. I hope we can continue this collaboration in the future. And above all, I want to thank Dr. Hirschfeld for this stimulating, provocative talk. Please join me in thanking you.